Hello everyone, it's HockeyXchange here. This is a video project of every NHL team that no longer exists and information of the last active players to have played for each team. In honor of the end of the NHL regular season, I wanted to compile this 3-part series into one video. Keep in mind, this project was completed during and before the start of the 2022-23 season, so active players still shown will have out-of-date statistics. I know most people will also be here to see more recent teams such as the Nordiques or the Whalers. With that, I will be putting in time codes of each era so you can skip to that section if need be. And so with that, I hope you enjoy the video. Let's begin with the first team to have dissolved in NHL history. The Montreal Wanderers began as an amateur ice hockey team that would later turn professional once they began play in the National Hockey Association. They briefly played in the NHL in its inaugural season of the 1917-18 season, where the organization would only play 6 games when a fire broke out and burned their arena to the ground. Without any funding and already having financial problems, the team would fold and their players would be dispatched to other teams. The last player to have stepped onto NHL ice was a player named Jerry Jaran, who played in the NHL for 2 seasons in his entire career. He is mostly well known as the first American-born player to ever play in the NHL and was also part of the first Ice Hockey Olympics in 1920, playing for Team USA and winning a silver medal. After several years playing in other hockey leagues, he would return to the NHL in the 1925-26 season, playing for the Boston Bruins. He would also become the first American-born player to score an NHL goal. In his entire career in the NHL, he would only record 5 goals and 1 assist, a total of 37 games. All of those points came in the last season that he would play. His last game would be on March 16, 1926. The Quebec Bulldogs were a hockey club that began in 1878, becoming one of the first ice hockey teams established in ice hockey history. The club continued to rise up the ranks and eventually became a pro team in the National Hockey Association in 1910, and eventually the NHL. The team would unfortunately last 1 season in the NHL before they were relocated to Hamilton to become the Hamilton Tigers. Dave Ritchie was a hockey player playing in the NHL for 3 years, becoming a star in his final season there before the change to the NHL. He is the first player in NHL history to have scored a goal on December 19, 1917 as a member of the Montreal Wanderers playing a game against the Toronto Arenas. Unfortunately, his career in the NHL wasn't as successful as his time in the NHA, having 2 stints in the NHL and only playing a handful of games. His last game would come on January 23, 1926, becoming the last active member to have played for the Quebec Bulldogs. The Hamilton Tigers were a team inherited by the Quebec Bulldogs and played from 1920 to 1925. They were a team that only had 1 successful year, which was unfortunately in their final year in the league. During the final season, there were tensions with the Tigers players and their general manager. They were paid only a certain amount and refused to pay their players. Thus began the first players' strike in NHL history. This resulted in the franchise's dissolution, and the players' contracts were sold to a new expansion team, the New York Americans. Harry Birch, or more well known as Billy Birch, was an American-born player in the National Hockey League, making his debut in January 1923, finishing off his last 10 games with 9 points. His rise to become a superstar would come the following season, where he would score 22 points in 24 games. In only his 3rd season, he would win the Hart Trophy as the league's most valuable player. That would be the same year that the Hamilton Tigers would hold the first players' strike. Billy would follow the team to New York and became part of history as the first New York Americans player to score a goal. In the 1926-27 season, he would win the Lady Byng Trophy as the player to have exhibited the best type of sportsmanship and gentlemanly-like conduct. His career would continue up until the 1932-33 season. In 1974, he was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. He was one of the best hockey players of his time, being in the top 10 in scoring 4 times in his 11-year career. The Pittsburgh Pirates became the 7th team to join the NHL, as well as the league's 3rd US-based team, founded from 1925 all the way to 1930. The team would have a successful first season, maintaining a winning record, but there was no success in the playoffs. The next 4 years would find the Pirates with little to no success, with the last season being one of the worst seasons to date. The financial crash of 1929 would lead to the death of the franchise. 1 year later, the team would relocate to become the Philadelphia Quakers. The last player to have played for the Pittsburgh Pirates is Cliff Barton. He began his NHL career playing in the last season of the Pittsburgh Pirates before their relocation to Philadelphia. After 2 seasons in the NHL, he would be back in the minor leagues for 9 years until, when playing for the New York Rangers minor league team, he was called up to play 3 games in the 1939-1940 season, but unfortunately did not record any points. He would spend the rest of his career in the minors until his retirement in 1944. Not a memorable career to say the least, but you can definitely say he stuck around long enough to get another shot in the NHL, and no one can take that away from him. The Philadelphia Quakers unfortunately don't have a lot in their history, as they only lasted 1 year as a team. They had an inaugural season finishing with 4 wins in 44 games. This ranks them as having the second worst record in NHL history by win percentage. It came to a surprise that this player once played for this team. Introducing Sid Howe. Fans of his will know him as a Detroit Red Wing and as one of the top players of his time, winning 3 Stanley Cups with the Red Wings. But what you may not know was that his career began in a completely different way. His debut came in the 1929 season, debuting with the Ottawa Senators. That next year, he was loaned to the Philadelphia Quakers for their only season in the NHL, then played for the Toronto Maple Leafs when the Senators ceased operations during the 1930-31 season, returned to the Senators for another 2 years, then with the St. Louis Eagles when the Senators relocated, and then finally, staying put with his last team with the Detroit Red Wings, where the rest is history. It seemed like every year he was playing for another city for that first 5 years, but this didn't hinder the young Howe, as his career only began after settling in Detroit, arguably as one of the best players during his time, with his highest tally with 60 points in 48 games. He would play a total of 12 years with the Red Wings and retired from the game in 1946. Some notable achievements from his time in the NHL were the 3 Stanley Cups as stated before, and was one of 8 players to have scored more than 6 goals in 1 game. In 1965, he was inducted to the Hockey Hall of Fame. Before we had the current incarnation of the Ottawa Senators, they were the original Ottawa Senators, founded before the birth of the NHL in 1883. The club would join the NHL in 1917 as one of the original 4 teams to play in the NHL's first season. The organization found huge success during their time competing for the Stanley Cup both in the NHA and the NHL, winning a total of 11 championships from 1903 to 1927. The Ottawa Senators would unfortunately fold as the club struggled to have funds and was in major debt, and in 1934 was sold and relocated to St. Louis, where they became the St. Louis Eagles. Frank Hollett, also known as Flash Hollett, was one of the first offensive defensemen of his day, making his debut as a Maple Leaf in the 1934-35 season, but finished that year being loaned to the Senators. It wasn't until he went to Boston where he would become an NHL superstar defenseman. He was playing during a time where defensemen were not point producers and that the league only had a 50-game schedule at most. He played for 8 seasons in Boston, contributing to the Bruins Stanley Cup championships in 1939 and 1941. In 1942, he set a record for goals by a defenseman with 19 goals. In the 1944-45 season, he would break his own goals record with 20 goals and scoring 41 points in 50 games, playing with the Detroit Red Wings. This record would stand for a quarter of a century before being surpassed by Bobby Orr. Hollett would retire from the NHL after 13 seasons, scoring 132 goals and 181 assists for 313 points. At the time of his retirement, he was the highest scoring defenseman in league history, won 2 Stanley Cups, was a 2-time All-Star, was in top 5 with goals and assists and points for 2 seasons. At the time, the Norris Trophy for the best defenseman wasn't around yet, so imagine how many more trophies he could have won. The St. Louis Eagles were a team inherited by the Ottawa Senators that played from 1917 to 1934. The first year of the Eagles was also the last, as the team struggled to gain traction with fans and a losing record. What hit the team with financial troubles the worst were the travel costs, as they were playing in the Canadian division and travel expenses became way too much. After that, the team would fold and cease to exist. Bill Cowley was described as the Wayne Gretzky of his era. He began his NHL career as a St. Louis Eagle. Once the team folded, he went to play with the Boston Bruins. He would eventually break out as a superstar player in his second season in the league. In 1939, he would break an NHL record for the most assists with 34 in 34 games. That same season would also see him break through the playoffs, leading his team with points. He would also set a new NHL record with 64 points in a 48-game season, winning the Hart Trophy as MVP. Throughout his playing career, he would have amazing statistical point-per-game percentages, but was derailed by injuries. In his final season in the league, he would become the all-time points leader in the NHL, surpassing Sid Howe. Upon his retirement, he led the league in assists and points from 1944 to 1952, with a total of 354 assists and 549 points. He won 2 Hart Trophies, 2 Stanley Cups, was a 5-time All-Star, led the league in assists per game 5 times and points per game 4 times. His 1944 record of nearly 2 points per game stood from 1944 up until 1981, when a young player of Wayne Gretzky was the first person to break that record. Bill Cowley would be inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1968, and to this day is still considered one of the greatest players of his time. The Montreal Maroons played in the NHL starting in 1924, winning a Stanley Cup in 1926 and 1935. But due to financial difficulties resulting from the Great Depression, led to the suspending play after 1938. Despite efforts to revive the team, the franchise was officially cancelled in 1947, leaving the Canadiens as the sole team in Montreal. They were the last non-Original Six team to have won the Stanley Cup. Herb Kane began his NHL career playing with the Montreal Maroons, being a top contributor on his team, winning 1 Stanley Cup during his time there. By this time, you may have noticed that many players I've talked about had an all-time record in points during the 1943 and 44 season, and that was because scoring was substantially increased due to players joining World War II. Those who stayed back at home to play in the league saw many of the numbers increase for a short period of time, and Herb was no exception, scoring an all-time high 82 points, surpassing the previous record of 73 points. And like many other players within the following few years, he had a substantial regression from 82 points to 29 points in just 2 years. That same year will also see him be demoted to the minor leagues until his retirement in 1950. He would end his career with 2 Stanley Cups, one with the Maroons and one with the Bruins. Although leading the league in points in the 1943-44 season, there were no trophies awarded at that time besides the MVP. To this day, he is the only player who has led the scoring title that have not been inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. The New York Americans were the 3rd expansion team to join the league along their expansion brothers, the Pittsburgh Pirates. While it was the first team in New York City, the downfall of the Americans began when the New York Rangers arrived, playing under the same roof. It didn't help that the Rangers were the more successful team, winning a Stanley Cup in their second year. The New York Americans found little to no success, often not making the playoffs, but the last straw came after suspending operations in 1942 due to World War II. With the New York Americans now gone, the demise of the club marked the beginning of the NHL's Original Six era. Ken Mosdell not only has the honors as the last member of the New York Americans franchise, but was also the last player until 1967 to play for an NHL team that was not part of the Original Six teams. He started the season where the New York Americans changed their name to the Brooklyn Americans and then signed with the Montreal Canadiens, where he would go on to have a successful career, winning 4 Stanley Cups with the Canadiens. Besides winning 4 Stanley Cups, he had an above-average career, playing in 5 All-Star games and being in top 10 scoring 2 times. By the time the 1957 and 58 season would begin, he would only play 2 games, recording 1 assist. That would mark the last time that he would play for an NHL franchise. The Kansas City Scouts were a team that ended the NHL's first expansion period, founded in 1972. They began play in 1974, only lasted 2 years, and didn't have any success on the ice. In their entire existence, they had a record of 27 wins, 110 losses, and 23 ties, and kinda explains why it didn't work out so well and why nobody remembers them. But some hockey fans may be familiar with this name. Wilf Paymont is the franchise's first pick, going second overall, and was considered to be one of the toughest players from the 70s and the 80s. He would be the first Kansas City scout to score their first goal at their first home game. He would play for both seasons of the Scouts' entire existence, scoring 47 goals and 35 assists in 2 seasons, which isn't bad for an upcoming star, but the team surrounding him didn't achieve any success. He would continue with the franchise when they moved to become the Colorado Rockies, where he would maintain above a point per game throughout 3.5 years until he was traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs, where he would score his best season, being a 40-goal scorer for the second time and scoring an all-time high 97 points. He would only stay with the Leafs for 2.5 years when he was traded again, this time to the Quebec Nordiques, where he would spend most of his time there. He was known for his talent on the ice, but also was a very controversial player, often starting fights, and was a trash talker due to the frustration in losing on the ice, which made him very liable on the team, even getting suspended for 15 games, instigating a fight that had gone too far. This led to many teams trading him only a few seasons, leading him to becoming a journeyman. He would continue his journey with other franchises up until his last season when he played with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and on January 10th, 1988, he would play his last game in the NHL, becoming the last player in history to have ever played for the Kansas City Scouts. The California Golden Seals were a part of 6 teams that were added to the league as part of the 1967 NHL expansion. Unfortunately, they were a victim of an expansion team that lacked player depth and superstars and poor management, with the biggest regret trading away the first overall pick that ended up being Guy Lafleur. You know, just a player who went to have a Hall of Fame career with over 1,300 points, being one of the biggest hockey names in the 70s, a nobody. Once relocated to Cleveland as the Barons, they pretty much remained the same and declined, lasting only 2 years until they merged with another struggling franchise, which were the Minnesota North Stars. Dennis Maruk was often forgotten as a 50 and 60 goal scorer during his prime, but he also started out as a California Golden Seals pick, 21st overall, and debuted during the final year of the Golden Seals' existence, producing 62 points and was a Calder finalist. He would spend the next few years in Cleveland, scoring nearly a point per game until the merge with the North Stars, playing only 2 games in their first year with Minnesota, but was traded to the Washington Capitals, scoring an all-time high 90 points that season. During his prime, he would rack up 431 points in 343 games, along with the season where he had an all-time high 60 goals and 136 points, placing him 4th in league scoring that year. He would be part of Capitals history where he helped them make the playoffs for the first time the year after, but then was traded back to the North Stars. He would finish his later years with the team and play his last game on February 15, 1989, as the last member of both the California Seals and the Cleveland Barons. The Atlanta Flames were a franchise founded in 1971 as part of the NHL's conflict with the rival World Hockey Association. The team had middling success but couldn't get out of the first round. It also didn't help that attendance for the Flames were very poor throughout their time in Atlanta, with an average of around 10,000 in a 15,000-seat stadium every year. Under those circumstances, the Atlanta Flames ownership would find another owner in Calgary, where they would become the Calgary Flames. Kent Nilsson, or the original Magic Man, was a known superstar in the WHA and was required by the Atlanta Flames once the WHA merged into the NHL. He played in the final season with the Atlanta Flames, scoring 40 goals and 91 points before the relocation to Calgary. He would set an all-time record in points in a season with 131 points and remains a Calgary Flames record to this day. Not even Johnny Gaudreau, who played this past season, came close to those numbers. He was known to his opponents as one of the most skilled puck handlers during his era. He would continue to play with the Flames franchise for 5 years, scoring another 100-point season and remaining above a point per game until 1985. In 1986, he would depart the Flames to join the Minnesota North Stars for a season and a half. He would then be traded to the Edmonton Oilers and became a huge contributor to the team, going on a deep playoff run and even winning the Stanley Cup. Still producing at a successful rate, he would decide to depart from the NHL to play back in his home country in Europe, oddly at the young age of just 30 years old. On the surface, he looked like a great player who had above a point per game in his career, even when Gretzky once said that.
Skill-wise, he might have been the most skilled hockey player I ever saw in my entire career.
So what happened? There was a lot of criticism from his play during his prime years, both from Flames media and his team, and couldn't get his team past the first 2 rounds when in the playoffs. Scoring less than a point per game during the playoffs didn't help either, and was criticized as a player who didn't want to get into the dirty areas on the ice. Even his own teammates once said, quoting, "In my opinion, Kent was as good as the guy 200 miles north when he wanted to play." And that was the issue, when he wanted to play. He would attempt a comeback, having a brief stint in the 1994-95 season with the Edmonton Oilers, playing 6 games, scoring only 1 goal during that stretch. That being the last time he would step in the NHL ice, and was the last player in the NHL to have played with the Atlanta Flames. Looking back at what could have been, it makes you think he could have made the Hall of Fame if he had a longer career in the NHL. Though his career ended early, you could not forget his skill and talent when he played. He was arguably one of the best players during his time in the league. After failing as an expansion team in Kansas City, the team relocated to Colorado to be known as the Rockies, not to be confused with the current MLB team of the same name. The Rockies only lasted 6 seasons until being relocated again to become the New Jersey Devils. In those 6 years in the league, the Rockies never got more than 22 wins in an 80-game season and only made the preliminary round once. Joe Cirello was only a rookie when he played for the Rockies and was drafted 5th overall in the Rockies' last season. The defenseman would be part of teams that were some of the worst teams to have played on the ice, but it wasn't anything of his doing. Once they relocated to New Jersey, he continued to play with them and even made an All-Star appearance. His best season was also the same year where the New Jersey Devils would make the playoffs for the first time, being part of that underdog team that made it to the conference finals in 1988, but fell short to the Boston Bruins in Game 7. Unfortunately, luck did not follow after that season. After making a trip with the Quebec Nordiques, now with the New York Rangers, he would have some success statistically, but still fell short. A couple more stops and he would make his last appearance in the NHL with the Ottawa Senators in the 1995-96 season, making him the last player to have played with the Rockies. From my research, it was hard to find any information about him during his time playing hockey, but I did find that he was a tough fighter who racked up penalty minutes and could compete with the toughest players during that time. If there was more information that I missed about him, please let me know in the comments below. Before the Minnesota Wild, there were the Minnesota North Stars, founded in 1967 up until 1993. Throughout their time, they had their struggles on the ice, but they also shared some success, being the first team on this list to have made the Stanley Cup Finals, not only once, but twice. But a combination of poor attendance in their later years, a failure to reach a new deal on a new stadium, and on top of sexual harassment lawsuits against the owner at the time, caused a chain reaction of an inevitable relocation. Before that though, the North Stars were able to draft a player that would remain in the organization. Mike Modano, who was arguably the best American-born player, was drafted 1st overall with the North Stars in 1988. He was an instant success, being a finalist for the Rookie of the Year and getting the team into the finals in his 2nd year, totaling 20 points in the playoffs, but fell short to the Pittsburgh Penguins. He would average a little over 77 points during his first 4 years as a North Star until their relocation to Dallas, where in his first year scored 50 goals and tied his all-time high of 93 points. He remained a consistent 30 goal scorer and was roughly a 70-80 point player in the next 12 years and spent a total of 20 years with the North Stars franchise. In his time in Dallas, he would win a Stanley Cup, leading the team in points for both in the regular season and the playoffs. He would also be a finalist for both the Selke, being the best defensive forward, and the Lady Byng for most gentleman-like player. Mike Modano would become the last active North Star by the 2007-08 season, and he would continue to play until his last season with the Detroit Red Wings in 2011. At the end of his career, he played a total of 1,499 games with over 500 goals and over 1,300 points, ranking him 26th all-time. He is also first in points in the regular season and the playoffs by an American-born player. He had 1 Stanley Cup, 1 World Cup gold medal, and 1 silver in the Olympics. In 2014, he was inducted to the Hockey Hall of Fame and was also named in the NHL's 100 Greatest Players list by the NHL. The Quebec Nordiques relocation didn't come from any hardships or financial loss, as there was a passionate fan base to help sustain a franchise, and even when the team was at their worst, the fans still showed up. But the fears of unsustainability were arising during the late 1990s. A combination of a new age of rising player salaries and a weakening Canadian dollar, the Nordiques owner was worried that sustainability was going to be a problem. It also didn't help that the Nordiques were one of the smallest North American major league cities. After 24 years, the Nordiques were moved to Colorado to become the Avalanche. Adam Foote was selected 22nd overall by the Quebec Nordiques in the 1989 NHL entry draft. A defensive defenseman who played for a long time in the Avalanche, he wasn't a flashy player or a player who scored a lot of points, but was a very reliable, tough defenseman. Where he may not have showed on the scoreboard, he definitely showed when you watched him play, and is often noted by Avalanche fans as an underrated defenseman, similar to what a power forward would be but for defense. He always knew where to go and knew how to play the game. He would win 2 Stanley Cups while with the Avalanche. Afterwards, he would have a brief stint with the Columbus Blue Jackets after the NHL lockout and was the captain for the team for the 3 years he was there. In that final year with Columbus, he was traded back to the Colorado Avalanche, where he would remain for the rest of his time in the NHL. He was the last player to have played for the Quebec Nordiques once Joe Sakic retired in 2009. Foote would become the next captain of the Avalanche until his retirement in 2011, accumulating 308 points, 2 cups, and 1 Olympic gold medal as well. He is also placed 18th all-time in playoffs games played by a defenseman. What an impressive resume. He may not have produced a lot in his career, but he definitely made up for it by being one of the hardest and smartest players in his position. The original Winnipeg Jets franchise never had any major success while in the NHL, with their biggest problem being in the same division with their Alberta rivals, the Edmonton Oilers and the Calgary Flames, 2 teams that had players that were more talented, while the Jets were always seen as the third team to be stuck in the middle. The Jets franchise fell into the same victim as the Quebec Nordiques and eventually chose Phoenix, Arizona to be the final destination for their franchise to relocate to become the Phoenix Coyotes. The last player picked in the first round by the original Winnipeg Jets, Shane Doan would begin his career in 1995 and relocated with the Jets to Phoenix. During his first 4 years in the league, he struggled, scoring a total of only 22 goals and 62 points during that run. At that point of his career, Doan looked like he was going to be a top 10 bust. Little did people know though, he would become the second longest player to play in the NHL from his draft class and become a leader and contributor in the desert, surpassing his goals and dominating his points records with 51 points in his 5th year, and will remain a prominent 20-30 goal scorer and a 50-60 point player in the remaining seasons with the Coyotes. After future Hall of Famer Teemu Selanne retired in 2014, Shane Doan remained as the last member of the original Winnipeg Jets, remaining a member of the Coyotes until the very end of his career in 2017. He stayed with the team that struggled for their entire existence and showed his loyalty until the very end, with the closest they've gotten to Lord Stanley when they lost in the 3rd round in 2012. During his career, Doan led the Phoenix Coyotes in scoring in every season between 2003 to 2011, is the all-time points leader with the Coyotes, and ended his career with a total of 1,540 games played, all with the Winnipeg Jets and Coyotes franchise, which is 3rd in most games played with one team in their entire career. He also won the King Clancy, which is a trophy awarded to the player who best exemplifies leadership qualities, in 2010, and also the Mark Messier Leadership Award, which recognizes an individual as a superior leader within their sport, in 2012, along with 2 gold and 3 silver medals in the World Championships representing Canada. There is a debate whether or not Shane Doan deserves to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame, with more people leaning towards him not, because he isn't on par with those superstars, as he wasn't known to be a dominant player on the ice, but others make an argument that he should, as a player with longevity and leadership. Do you think he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame? The Hartford Whalers were the last team from the WHA to be relocated, and during their existence, never made it past round 2. They were often considered one of the worst franchises in hockey during the stretch in their last decade in the league. A combination of ownership making poor decisions in ticket sales and attendance not being on par forced the owner to relocate to North Carolina, where they would become the Carolina Hurricanes. Introducing the first and only goalie on the list, Jean-Sebastien Giguère was drafted 13 overall by the Hartford Whalers. He, like many other players on this list, were drafted a year before the team would move to a new city. He would only play 1 year with the Hartford Whalers until their relocation. However, he was traded during the offseason to the Calgary Flames. On his new team, he would spend some time in the minor leagues to improve his goaltending, having a couple stints in the NHL. He didn't get his big break until he was traded to the Mighty Ducks in 2000. In 2003, he would record his first winning season and lead the Mighty Ducks into the playoffs. His performance is notable to be one of the greatest playoff performances ever seen by an NHL goaltender, and nearly single-handedly got the team to the Stanley Cup, winning the Conn Smythe Trophy, being the first player to win playoff MVP as the opposing team since 1987. He still remains as the last player to have won the playoff MVP as an opposing player. 3 years later, he would fulfill that dream. Now with a stacked team, he would win the finals and get the Stanley Cup. Once his tenure in Anaheim was done, he was traded to Toronto but didn't stay there for too long. His success in the regular season would soon decline as he spent his last 3 years in Colorado and retired in 2014, becoming the last Hartford Whaler to have skated in the NHL. Jean-Sebastien Giguère currently leads the Ducks franchise with the most wins by a goalie and is one of 5 players to have ever won the Conn Smythe as an opponent that lost in the finals. The Atlanta Thrashers were an NHL team that was founded in 1997, which was one of 4 new expansion teams during the end of the 20th century. They were the first NHL franchise to be brought back to Atlanta since 1980. The Thrashers began play in 1999 but sadly lasted only 11 seasons in the league, making only 1 playoff appearance in their entire existence, with the last game being played on April 10, 2011. Within a month, it was announced that the team was going to be moved to Winnipeg, and that's when they became the new Winnipeg Jets. The Thrashers, like many other now defunct teams, had a group of superstars that have played for their franchise. Players such as Ilya Kovalchuk, Marian Hossa, Danny Heatley, Brian Little, and Dustin Byfuglien are some of the well-known players that have played for the franchise. Sometimes I wonder who are the remaining players of the Atlanta Thrashers. It's going to be 13 years since the Thrashers have last played, so there are only a few handful of players that are left in the game. Let's take a look at them, shall we? As seen previously, there are 4 players that are still active to have played this past season. All of these players are still under contract until or beyond the 2022-23 season. To begin with the first player, Andrew Ladd had already achieved what many players strive to get, and that is the Stanley Cup. Drafted by Carolina 4th overall in the 2004 draft, he made his debut in 2006 after the NHL lockout and played a handful of games. After some more time in the minor leagues, he would get a call back up during the Hurricanes' playoff run. He would win the cup in his rookie year with a team that wasn't expected to win. He would continue to improve his play the following 2 seasons until he was traded at the deadline to the Chicago Blackhawks in the 07-08 season. A key contributor to what the Blackhawks were building at the time, and won a Stanley Cup with them. Andrew Ladd has already been part of 2 Stanley Cup championships in just 5 years playing in the league. Talk about being in the right team at the right time. With Ladd becoming an unrestricted free agent, being a part of winning teams will inflate your value, and unfortunately, the Blackhawks knew they couldn't afford him. So in the summer of 2010, after winning the cup, Andrew Ladd was traded to the Atlanta Thrashers and became the team's next captain. After 1 year in Atlanta, the team was relocated to Winnipeg to become the Jets. Ladd continued as the captain for the remaining 5 years that he was with the team, leading them to their first playoff berth during that time, but lost in 4 games to the Anaheim Ducks. After his contract had ended, he would sign for 1 more year, but was traded at the deadline to the Blackhawks to reunite with his teammates in hopes for another deep run, but would fall short in the first round. Now at the age of 31 and an unrestricted free agent, he would sign a huge 7-year deal with the Islanders at $5.5 million. Unfortunately, he didn't live up to his contract and his production declined in just a season after, coming from being a 50-60 point producer to a mere 31 points that next season. His next 3 years with the team only showed more regression and injuries, and in 2021, he didn't play a single game in the NHL, making it look like his time in the NHL was over. But in the summer of 2021, he was traded to the Arizona Coyotes, where he would be guaranteed a full-time roster for the rebuilding team, playing a role as a veteran with leadership, helping guide the rookies. The 2022-23 season would be his last year of his 7-year contract that he signed way back in the Islanders in 2016. It is very likely that this will be his last year in the NHL. If so, He would be the last Atlanta Thrashers captain to have skated in the league. Zach Bogosian was a well-known defenseman prospect from the Ontario Hockey League and was a nominee for the Red Tilson Trophy in the same year he was draft eligible, ranked as the second best North American prospect in the upcoming 2008 NHL Draft. He was drafted 3rd overall by the Atlanta Thrashers franchise and immediately made a roster spot as the youngest player with that team that year. He was a decent contributor in his rookie year, scoring 19 points in 47 games. The next 2 years with the Thrashers though, he would find his struggles on the scoreboard, but was still a decent physical defenseman who could get in the tight areas on the ice. Once the Thrashers relocated to Winnipeg, he would have his best offensive season, scoring 30 points in 65 games, but once again failed to make the playoffs. And that would be a continuing pattern, playing 12 seasons with no regular season success. In 2020, he would have his contract terminated by the Buffalo Sabres after refusing to be demoted to the minor leagues. It may have looked like his career was coming to an end, but fortunately, he was picked up by the Tampa Bay Lightning and played his first playoff game that same year. This would be the year that Tampa would make it all the way to the finals and win a Stanley Cup, playing a contributing role, scoring 4 assists in 20 games. His expectations as a 3rd overall pick is disappointing as he was selected high in the draft. It didn't help that the first 2 players picked over him were future Hall of Famers Steven Stamkos and Drew Doughty. He may not have lived up to his draft pick, but who can argue a Stanley Cup? This season will be his last year for his contract with Tampa, so it is likely we will be seeing his career come to an end if he doesn't get a new contract this coming off season. Oh boy, where do we even start with Evander Kane? If you are a new hockey fan or just been living under a rock, he is the definition of a player who is conflicted with the league. But first, let's talk about his career so far. Evander Kane, during his time in Major Junior, was the number one to be known, playing with the Vancouver Giants in the Western Hockey League from 2006 all the way to 2009. In his last 2 years with the team, he would produce substantially, with his final year producing an all-time record 48 goals and 96 points. He would then be drafted 4th overall by the Atlanta Thrashers in 2009, and at the time was the highest drafted black player in league history. He is a powerful dynamic power forward who could help you score and is a tough fighter, once going up against one of the biggest goons in the NHL as a rookie and knocking him out. This began his reputation of being a player that you did not want to mess with. But his greatest strength was also his greatest weakness. Rumors of having issues with teammates in the locker room, from abuse to assault allegations, gambling issues leading him to declaring bankruptcy, to even faking a COVID card, getting suspended 21 games. And that's just scratching the surface. But when he isn't causing trouble on the ice, he does have the ability to score 30 goals in a healthy season and can be a really good player when in the right situation. But the things he does off the ice can overshadow his skills as a hockey player. His career has had him rounding up in Edmonton, where he has signed a 4-year contract that would begin this season. Many people are having him as a dark horse to be a 40-50 goal scorer if he's able to recapture the magic run playing with McDavid or Draisaitl. It is not a surprise that in his last 58 games, including the playoffs, he scored 35 goals. If stretched out to a full regular season, that's a nearly 50-goal pace. He is the only active member of the Atlanta Thrashers to have his contract extended beyond the 2023 and 24 season, and is also the youngest player of the group. Realistically, he has the best shot of becoming the last active member of the Atlanta Thrashers. If he can get his off-season shenanigans in order and keeps his head low on the ice moving forward, there is no doubt he can stay in the league. But how many more times are we going to give Evander Kane a chance before he's officially out of the NHL? Taking a look at the last member of the Atlanta Thrashers, we have Blake Wheeler. He was drafted in 2004, 5th overall by the Phoenix Coyotes. He didn't start his career immediately in the NHL and decided to opt into college, playing 3 years with the University of Minnesota. After failing to come to terms with a contract with the Coyotes, he signed with the Boston Bruins as a free agent, having a solid rookie season, scoring 45 points in 81 games, with a plus-minus ratio of 36, which was 2nd on the team. Only after 2 seasons with the Bruins and he was traded to the Atlanta Thrashers. That following year was also when the team relocated to become the Jets. Since then, he's been a top contributor and the face of a franchise that when people talk about the new Winnipeg Jets, being with the Jets since day one and producing 60-70 points every year, it was in no doubt that he would be the next captain, which he inherited in 2016 after they traded away their previous captain, Andrew Ladd, to the Blackhawks. The furthest that he has led the team was when they made it all the way to the conference finals back in 2018 against the Vegas Golden Knights, but since then, the Jets have never been able to make it past round 2. There has been speculation whether or not he is going to be traded before his contract expires, as Blake Wheeler is slowly beginning to show a decline in his defensive game. At the age of 36, it is more likely he'll decline in production, but it is impressive that he's still maintaining nearly a point per game despite his age. It's still unknown what the future holds for him, but one thing is for sure, that Blake Wheeler will go down as one of the best Jets players to have played with the franchise. And there you have it. We have finally reached the present time. It's interesting to see how long a team's legacy can last through players that used to play for them. I just wanted to say thank you so much for sticking around for this long, and if you are new here and are curious of what I do, I like to create hockey videos just like this one. If you enjoy this kind of content and want to watch more, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe for more content. And with that, I hope to see you next time.